The panorama from the 53rd floor of the Carter Enterprises building in New York City was simply stunning. The expansive glass windows reached from floor to ceiling, offering an unobstructed view of the Empire State Building on one side and the Hudson River on the other. Alexander Carter, the billionaire CEO of Carter Enterprises, reclined in his mahogany chair, gazing out at the twinkling city lights as yet another long day drew to a close. To the world, Alexander possessed it all: authority, riches, and sway. Yet, in truth, he was utterly alone. 10 years ago, his parents perished in a car accident, leaving him to navigate the complexities of running a billion-dollar business on his own. Companions? He possessed nothing. Females? Many had come, yet none remained. All were eager for his wealth, his reputation, his dominion. He glanced at his Rolex. The time read 9 p.m. Linda, his secretary, had departed an hour earlier. The office was devoid of any presence, just as he preferred. He let out a deep breath, reclining into the embrace of his leather chair. He had constructed this empire from the very foundations, yet what was the purpose if there was no one to enjoy it alongside him? At that moment, the stillness was pierced by the creak of his office door swinging open. Alexander scowled. His office was a sanctuary, a place where unannounced visitors were unwelcome, particularly at this hour. He rotated his chair with deliberate slowness and caught sight of a woman poised at the threshold, grasping the hand of a little boy. Her long auburn hair cascaded down her shoulders, framing her piercing green eyes that sparkled with intensity, all complemented by a resolute expression that spoke of unwavering determination. She was known, perhaps too well known. His heart ceased to beat. Emily Dawson. A name that had faded from memory for 5 long years. A name he had concealed beneath the weight of labor, wealth, and authority. "What on earth brings you here?" Alexander inquired, his tone as frigid as the New York winter beyond the window. Emily remained steadfast. She stepped forward, drawing the little boy nearer to her. A child, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, with tousled brown hair and striking deep blue eyes that mirrored Alexander's own. His chest constricted. He wished to reject the notion taking shape in his mind, yet beneath the surface, he was aware of the reality even before Emily uttered a word. "This is your son," she stated, her voice steady and resolute. The word struck him with the force of a wrecking ball. His fingers gripped the armrest of the chair with increasing intensity. Is that his son? Unthinkable. He rose gradually, his gaze fixed intently on Emily. "I'm not sure what you're trying to imply, but I don't have a son." Emily's jaw tightened. "Indeed, you do, Alexander. Nathan is his name, and he belongs to you." Alexander's eyes moved toward the boy. "Nathan." The child gazed at him, filled with curiosity yet devoid of any fear. The boy's expression held a disquieting familiarity for Alexander, akin to gazing into a mirror. Thoughts surged through his mind. 5 years prior, he had been with Emily. They had shared a connection, or at least he had believed it to be a profound bond. Yet, she departed without uttering a single word. Or was he the one who chose to leave? What is the reason for this moment? Alexander's voice carried an icy detachment. "What brings you back after all this time?" Emily inhaled deeply, her grip firm around Nathan's small hand. "He has a right to understand his father's identity." As she paused, her green eyes brimmed with the emotions she struggled to contain. "Because I never desired your wealth, Alexander. I never sought anything from you." Alexander emitted a sardonic chuckle. "So, what brings you here? What is it that you desire?" Emily stepped forward, her voice soft yet resolute. Silence prevails. "I simply wish to share the truth with you." After years of dominance, Alexander Carter, a titan of New York's elite, found himself engulfed in an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. The boy, his son, gazed up at him, anticipation written all over his face. A response, a reply, something. Yet Alexander possessed none. He dedicated his life to constructing a vast empire, amassing millions, and broadening his business reach to London, Dubai, and Tokyo. He had outwitted rivals, vanquished foes, and obliterated barriers. In that instant, facing the son he had never known, he experienced a profound sense of losing control for the very first time. The stillness lingered in the air around them. Emily let out a deep breath. "I hold no expectations from you, Alexander. I felt it was important to share this with you. That concludes everything." As she began to turn away, Nathan's voice broke the silence, marking his first words. "Mommy, is he truly my father?" The purity in the boy's voice broke something within Alexander. His throat constricted, his hands balled into tight fists. He was at a loss for words. He found himself at a loss for words when faced with a child he had never encountered, never nurtured, and had never even conceived of as being real. Emily glanced at Nathan before shifting her gaze to Alexander. For a fleeting moment, her gaze became tender. "Indeed, my dear. Indeed, he is." Nathan nodded, seemingly absorbing the information presented to him. To Alexander's astonishment, he took a step forward and extended his tiny hand. "Hello, Dad." Alexander gazed at the small hand reaching out to him. Just as he greeted millionaires, CEOs, and investors with a firm handshake. However, on this occasion, it was not a transaction for profit. It was an experience of grand proportions. It was an unexpected turn of events. His fingers danced with anticipation. He had the option to leave. He could dismiss them and return to his vast fortune. Or he could venture into the uncharted, daunting, and unfamiliar realm of fatherhood. After years of certainty, Alexander Carter found himself pausing for the first time. The backdrop, yet within, there lingered solely the burden of an unforeseen truth. Alexander Carter, the formidable billionaire who had triumphed over business empires, now found himself immobilized before a 4-year-old boy asserting that he was his son. Nathan's tiny hand lingered in the air, poised for his father to grasp it in a shake. Yet, Alexander's fingers quivered, frozen in place. His piercing blue eyes darted between the child and Emily Dawson, the woman he had cherished and lost long ago. "Alexander," Emily finally uttered, her tone gentler than it had been. "Express yourself." Yet, what could he possibly articulate? The feelings coursing within him were unfamiliar. He had entered boardrooms filled with formidable billionaires, confronted aggressive takeovers, and even attended his parents' funeral without a single tear falling. Yet now, facing a child who bore his lineage, he felt utterly helpless. Nathan finally withdrew his hand, a flicker of disappointment crossing his deep blue eyes, mirroring Alexander's gaze. "Perhaps he doesn't wish to take on the role of my father," the young boy murmured, his voice scarcely audible. Emily let out a soft sigh and knelt beside him. "Nathan, we discussed this, dear. It's not merely about immediate desires. At times, adults require a moment to grasp certain concepts." Nathan nodded, yet his slight shoulders drooped in defeat. Alexander let out a sharp breath, running a hand through his dark hair. "Emily," he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need answers." At this moment. She gave a slight nod. "All right. However, this is not the place." Alexander surveyed his expansive corner office, a space where he had dedicated innumerable nights to solitary work. The space that had once been his stronghold now seemed cramped, stifling. "Let's go," he remarked. Emily paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. "Where is it?" "My penthouse," he declared with conviction. A flicker of doubt passed over her features, yet she gave a nod. "Understood." The ascent to Alexander Carter's penthouse in the Upper East Side was marked by a serene stillness. Nathan grasped Emily's hand, his gaze wandering in awe at the opulent glass walls and the gleaming gold-trimmed elevators. "Mommy, this place feels just like a grand castle." Emily beamed at her son, yet her eyes drifted toward Alexander. His jaw tightened, his eyes shadowy and inscrutable. The elevator doors chimed open, unveiling a breathtaking penthouse adorned with floor-to-ceiling windows, pristine marble floors, and luxurious contemporary furnishings. Nathan inhaled sharply. Incredible. Look, Mommy. One can behold the entirety of New York. Emily, on the other hand, was not captivated by the scenery. Her gaze was fixed on Alexander. Is this where you live? She inquired softly. Absolutely. Is it chilly? Alexander remained silent. He strolled over to the bar, filled a glass with his chosen drink, and then pivoted to face her once more. Go ahead and speak. Emily inhaled deeply. Do you seek the truth? This is it. I never abandoned you, Alexander. You abandoned me. He clenched the glass firmly. That is absolutely untrue. Emily's eyes sparkled with intensity. Could it be? Reflect on it, Alexander. Your fixation grew around your enterprise, your gatherings in Dubai, your transactions in London. You no longer had time for me. You were perpetually absent, consistently prioritizing work over affection. Alexander swallowed hard, his lips pressed together in silence. Emily pressed on, her voice heavy with feeling. I made an effort. I lingered in anticipation. But one day, I discovered that I was expecting. As I shared my thoughts, she hesitated, glancing aside, and you responded that we would discuss it later. Yet the anticipated moment never arrived. You departed for a 3-month engagement in Tokyo. I decided to go. Quietude. Alexander gazed at her, his thoughts swirling in a tumult of confusion. Is that truly how it unfolded? In his recollection, Emily had simply vanished. Disappeared from his existence. He spoke softly, you never called. Emily's sharp laughter reverberated through the penthouse. Yet you never sought me out. Alexander's throat was parched. Had he truly been so consumed by his work that he allowed the one woman he ever loved to slip through his fingers? He cast his gaze upon Nathan, the boy who observed the exchange with a silent intrigue. That boy of his. His thoughts surged with remorse, yet his heart whispered a different truth. This was no longer solely about the past. The focus was on what lies ahead. Asterisk asterisk, I had no idea, Alexander confessed, his tone gentler now. Emily let out a deep breath. I understand. That's the reason I find myself here at this moment. At last, Alexander knelt down to meet Nathan's gaze. Nathan, he spoke with caution. I was unaware of your existence until this evening. The young lad blinked his eyes. Oh, you didn't. Negative. However, I certainly do at this moment. Nathan fixed his gaze on him for a moment before inquiring, so, what comes next? Alexander found himself at a loss for words. Yet, for the very first time in his existence, he was certain of one thing. He couldn't allow this child, his child, to simply walk out of his life. He would never repeat that error. Before we move on to the next segment, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Alexander Carter had constructed a vast dominion. He had finalized billion-dollar agreements, engaged in negotiations with the most influential figures globally, and endured fierce corporate conflicts. Yet, nothing, struck a chord of fear quite like the instant he understood he was gazing upon his own child. Nathan Carter. The young lad perched on the pristine white couch of Alexander's penthouse, his tiny hands nervously toying with the edge of his sweater. Emily perched next to him, taut and observant, as if she anticipated Alexander's words might disrupt the delicate tranquility of the moment. Yet Alexander found himself at a loss for words. He had experienced surprises in the past, like when a deal fell apart due to a competitor's clever tactics, but nothing quite like this. This felt unique. This was not a matter of business. This was home. At long last, after what seemed like an endless stretch of time, he cleared his throat. "Nathan," he inquired thoughtfully, "what are your interests?" The young lad paused for a moment, then raised his gaze to meet his mother's eyes. She offered him a subtle nod of support. Nathan expressed his fondness for airplanes. Alexander lifted an eyebrow in curiosity. "Aircraft?" Nathan nodded eagerly, his youthful face brightening with excitement. "Absolutely, I aspire to become a pilot someday. Observing the graceful ascent of planes is something I truly enjoy. Sometimes, my mom takes me to JFK to see them." Alexander's lips quivered slightly. John F. Kennedy International Airport. For years, he had been in and out of that place, yet he had never taken a moment to appreciate the planes. He was perpetually in a hurry, constantly on the move, relentlessly pursuing the next opportunity. And yet here stood his son, his very own, who found pure joy in watching planes soar through the sky. A sensation gripped Alexander's chest. After a brief pause, he remarked, "I happen to own a private jet." Nathan's eyes grew wide. "Indeed, you do." Alexander gave a slight nod. "Are you interested in checking it out sometime?" Nathan's jaw dropped in astonishment. He glanced at his mother, as though looking for her approval. Emily paused for a moment, then a smile broke across her face. "Perhaps one day," she remarked. Nathan glanced at Alexander, his enthusiasm bubbling just beneath the surface. Alexander breathed out gently. He felt uncertain about what actions to take and what words to express. He had devoted his whole adult life to solitude, immersed in his work, firmly believing that feelings were mere interruptions. Yet, at this moment, emotions were his sole possession. "I want to know him," Alexander said, his voice filled with emotion. He glanced at Emily, seeking a glimpse of comprehension in her expression. "I'm unsure about this, Emily, but I'm eager to give it a shot." Emily observed him intently. "Are you suggesting that out of a sense of guilt? Or is it because you genuinely desire to be a part of his life?" Alexander paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. He was not the sort of man to be driven by guilt. Each action he took was deliberate, exact, purposeful. And yet this was chaotic, intricate, unmanageable. Yet, it was genuine. He confessed that he was unsure about how to embrace fatherhood. "Yet, I have a desire to acquire knowledge." Emily exhaled gently. "It's important to begin with the basics, Alexander. Simply pouring money into this won't guarantee success." Alexander recoiled at her words. Did she really perceive him that way? Was that money really his only answer? Perhaps that was the person he once was. But that's no longer the case. He inquired about how to begin. Emily gazed at him, her eyes lingering on his face for what felt like an eternity. She then shifted her gaze to Nathan. "Nathan, darling, would you like to spend some time with Alexander?" Nathan pressed his lip between his teeth. "Just the two of us?" Emily gave a slight nod. "Absolutely." Nathan appeared hesitant. He glanced at Alexander, his small fingers continuing to toy with the texture of his sweater. "What shall we do?" he inquired gently, as Alexander paused to reflect. He was completely at a loss when it came to keeping a child engaged. He was unaware of what children found appealing, what brought them joy. Yet, he recalled Nathan's earlier words. "How about I take you to see the planes at JFK, he proposed. "We can enter one. I'll gladly give you a glimpse of the cockpit." Nathan's expression brightened with enthusiasm. "Is that so?" Alexander gave a slight nod. "Is that so?" Nathan glanced at his mother, his eyes brimming with anticipation. Emily paused, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. She remained cautious, still filled with doubt. Yet, as she gazed upon Nathan's expression, a sigh escaped her lips, and she gave a subtle nod. "Very well," she replied. However, there are no bodyguards. Absolutely no business calls. Only you and Nathan. Alexander gulped. Nothing to do. Focus solely on the task at hand. Simply, embracing fatherhood. He gave a slight nod. Agreed. Nathan was practically bursting with enthusiasm. His tiny hands rested against the glass, captivated by the sight of the planes soaring into the sky. Alexander stood next to him, his gaze fixed on him rather than the planes overhead. Do you believe they move quickly? Nathan inquired, his voice brimming with curiosity. Alexander offered a faint smile. They move at an impressive speed. Nathan glanced in his direction. Have you ever flown in an airplane? Alexander let out a soft laugh. Countless times. Nathan's eyes grew large with surprise. That's incredibly impressive. After a moment of hesitation, Alexander asked, would you like to step inside one now? Nathan inhaled sharply. Is that so? Alexander gave a slight nod. Let's go. Moments later, they strolled across the exclusive tarmac, heading toward a polished Gulfstream G650, the personal jet of Alexander. Nathan's jaw fell open in disbelief. Is this your aircraft? Alexander beamed. Absolutely. Nathan dashed forward, enthusiasm emanating from every part of him. He approached the steps but paused, glancing back at Alexander. Are you coming? He inquired. Alexander felt a constriction in his chest. This was the moment. The initial genuine stride toward something greater. On the journey to fatherhood. He inhaled deeply and ascended the stairs. Within the walls, Nathan's enthusiasm was infectious. He dashed from one end of the cabin to the other, exploring every surface, fiddling with buttons that, fortunately, had no effect, and bombarding everyone with a flurry of questions. At last, they arrived at the cockpit. Nathan's eyes gleamed with excitement as he surveyed the array of controls and buttons before him. This is the place where the pilot takes his seat, he inquired. Alexander gave a slight nod. Absolutely. Nathan caressed the seat with a sense of deep respect. I aspire to spend a day here, immersed in the moment. A gentle warmth blossomed within Alexander's chest. Perhaps someday you shall. Nathan smiled broadly. Mother believes that with dedication and effort, dreams can become a reality. Alexander took a moment to reflect. Then he remarked, your mother possesses great intelligence. Nathan gave a slight nod. Indeed, she is. She truly is the most amazing mom. Alexander gazed at his son, the small child he had never realized existed. Yet, perhaps, there was still a chance to atone for it. Typically, he would be completely immersed, his mind keen as he examined each clause, making sure every detail was accounted for. Yet today, he found it impossible to focus, his thoughts continually wandered back to Nathan. The boy's thrill at JFK, the way his eyes gleamed as he reached for the cockpit controls, his curious inquiries about planes, it was a memory that lingered in Alexander's mind. Yet, he had no desire to. After a long time, his mind was filled with something beyond the realm of business. He reclined in his chair, letting out a deep breath. David Holloway, his assistant, stepped into the office, setting down a steaming cup of coffee before him. David mentioned that the board meeting is scheduled for an hour from now. Do you require any further notes? Alexander gave a slight shake of his head. Just the standard update. David paused briefly before continuing, and there's also a package for you. Alexander arched an eyebrow. Is there a package? David nodded and presented a small, carefully wrapped box, complete with an attached note. As Alexander opened the note, he instantly recognized the familiar strokes of Emily's handwriting. On Nathan's inaugural day alongside his father. I believe this could be beneficial. With a sense of intrigue, he lifted the lid of the box. Within lay a petite leather-bound notebook. As he turned the pages, he discovered that every single one was filled with suggestions and ideas for bonding activities with Nathan. Bring him to the park. Enjoy his favorite film together. Allow him to choose a restaurant for dinner. Share a soothing tale before he drifts off to sleep. Alexander felt a constriction in his chest. Emily had considered every detail. She understood that he lacked experience in fatherhood, so she was guiding him. He retrieved his phone and sent her a message. "Thank you for this, Alexander." The fact that his phone vibrated just a few seconds later holds significant meaning. "Emily, just give Alexander a try. He requires the presence of his father." He lingered over her message for a moment, his gaze fixed on the screen before finally reaching for the phone. "David," he stated, his voice resolute. "Kindly cancel my meeting scheduled for the afternoon. I have a destination to reach." 2 hours later, Alexander strolled through Central Park, his steps more languid than usual. He had company. Nathan strolled alongside him, clutching a vibrant red balloon that Emily had gifted him prior to their arrival. He remained unexpectedly silent, stealing glances at Alexander occasionally, as if he were still uncertain about him. Alexander, for his part, found himself at a loss for words as well. This was a realm he had never explored before. He devoted years to perfecting the art of negotiation, commanding boardrooms, and outwitting rivals. However, engaging in a dialogue with a 4-year-old? He was completely at a loss for how to begin. Nathan abruptly halted his steps and gestured. "Are we able to go there?" Alexander turned his attention and spotted a quaint carousel twirling in the distance. Joyful laughter filled the air as children galloped on the vividly adorned horses, while their parents watched fondly from the sidelines. Alexander paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. "Are you interested in pursuing that?" Nathan responded with enthusiasm. Without a moment's hesitation, Alexander grasped his hand and guided him toward the ride. Moments later, Nathan found himself atop a white horse, his hands firmly clutching the golden pole. Alexander positioned himself next to him, ensuring his safety. As the carousel started to turn, Nathan released a soft chuckle. Alexander felt a tightness in his chest. It marked the very first occasion he had ever heard Nathan's laughter. As the ride went on, Nathan turned to him, and it was the most beautiful sound in the world. "Have you ever been on carousels?" Alexander let out a soft laugh. "It has been quite a while." Nathan inclined his head thoughtfully. "Why not indeed?" Alexander paused before responding, "I suppose I've been rather occupied." Nathan scowled. Overwhelmed with responsibilities and lacking time for enjoyment. With a heavy sigh, Alexander exhaled. Overwhelmed with numerous commitments. Nathan remained silent, yet his tiny hand extended, gently pulling at Alexander's sleeve. "Perhaps we could enjoy ourselves together," Nathan suggested timidly, causing something in Alexander's heart to shatter wide open. "Perhaps we could," he murmured. Following a delightful afternoon at the park, Alexander stumbled upon a charming little Italian restaurant tucked away near Brooklyn Heights. Emily had consented to join them for dinner, eager to discover how the day had unfolded. Nathan was brimming with enthusiasm, sharing every little detail of their afternoon together with his mother. "As the horse galloped up and down, I felt the thrill of the moment with Daddy standing beside me, and it was an absolute blast." Alexander stood still. "Father." It was the inaugural moment Nathan had referred to him in that manner. Emily's eyes grew a touch wider, and she locked eyes with Alexander from across the table. Silence enveloped them, yet words were unnecessary. Nathan had made his decision. As the dinner progressed, Emily finally directed her attention to Alexander. "So, how did your inaugural day as a father go?" Alexander paused for a moment before speaking, a sense of dread in his voice. Emily wore a sly grin. "That seems accurate." Alexander let out a breath. "Yet, also astonishing." Emily's demeanor became gentler. "I feel a sense of joy." Nathan abruptly grasped Alexander's hand. "Dad, can we repeat this tomorrow?" Alexander sensed a transformation occurring within him. This had evolved beyond merely compensating for the time that had slipped away. This was centered around the experience of fatherhood. He clasped Nathan's small hand within his own. "Absolutely. We are capable." Nathan smiled broadly. For the very first time, Alexander Carter experienced a profound sense of happiness. Before we move on to the next segment, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Alexander Carter dedicated his existence to unraveling challenges. Finalizing massive agreements, maneuvering through corporate dynamics, and outwitting rivals. As he sat on a park bench in Brooklyn Heights, observing Nathan energetically pursue a squirrel, a realization dawned on him. Embracing fatherhood presented a unique set of challenges. Yesterday was enchanting. Nathan's inaugural carousel experience, his pure laughter, and the moment he had called him, Daddy, for the very first time. That single word had broken through every wall Alexander had constructed around his heart. However, today proved to be the ultimate challenge. "Look, Daddy!" Nathan exclaimed, gesturing toward a tiny yellow sphere resting by the edge of the sidewalk. Alexander beamed. "Would you like to play catch?" Nathan responded with eager agreement. Alexander grasped the ball and tossed it softly. Nathan seized it, chuckling as he tossed it back. For a fleeting moment, Alexander allowed himself to savor the pure delight of engaging in play with his son. What happened next? Nathan stumbled awkwardly, crashing onto the pavement with an ungraceful thud. In that fleeting moment, time seemed to stand still. Then Nathan's face twisted in anguish, and he released a piercing cry. Alexander felt his heart freeze. He hurried to his son, who was kneeling beside him. "Nathan! How are you doing?" Nathan sniffled, gazing down at his scraped knee, where a small trickle of blood began to emerge. "It aches." Alexander sensed a surge of panic swell within him. He had navigated through aggressive investors, dealt with furious board members, and confronted billion-dollar lawsuits, yet he found himself utterly unprepared when a 4-year-old was injured. He reached for his phone, ready to call Emily, but hesitated. "I can't reach out to her every time something occurs. I need to solve this puzzle." With a steadying inhale, he lifted Nathan into his embrace. "Shall we tackle this together, my friend?" Nathan sniffled softly but nodded, encircling his small arms around Alexander's neck. Alexander transported Nathan to a nearby pharmacy located on Montague Street. An elderly woman at the counter offered them a warm smile. "Oh my, what transpired?" Alexander paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. He tumbled down. He scraped his knee. The woman acknowledged with a knowing nod. "Is this your first time dealing with a scraped knee, Dad?" Alexander tensed up. Was it really that clear? She let out a soft laugh. "Rest assured. Every father experiences that moment." She picked up a compact first aid kit and passed it to him. "Disinfectants, dressings, and sweet treats. Believe me, the lollipop holds the utmost significance." Nathan let out a soft sniffle. "A sweet treat on a stick?" The lady gave him a playful wink. "Exclusively for the daring lads." Nathan nodded with gravity, prompting a soft chuckle from Alexander. They settled onto a nearby bench outside the store, and Alexander, his hands trembling just a bit, began to open the kit. "All right, my friend. This may cause a slight discomfort." Nathan observed him intently, as if assessing whether his father truly understood the task at hand. With careful precision, Alexander applied the antiseptic to Nathan's knee. Nathan grimaced. "That hurts." I understand, Alexander replied hastily. "But take a look, it's already spotless." Nathan blinked, a dawning awareness washing over him, as if he were coming to terms with the fact that it wasn't so bad after all. With meticulous attention, Alexander applied a delicate bandage to the injury. Here it is. As good as ever. Nathan examined his knee before raising his gaze to meet Alexander's eyes. You did well, Dad. A surge of pride welled up within Alexander as he passed the lollipop to Nathan. Nathan's expression brightened. Hooray! For the very first time, Alexander Carter experienced the profound essence of fatherhood. As the evening wore on, Alexander brought Nathan to Emily's apartment. Nathan burst through the door, proudly displaying his bandage as if it were a trophy. Mother? Father took care of it. Emily arched an eyebrow at Alexander. Did you take care of it? Alexander smirked, a sense of pride swelling within him. Indeed, I did. Emily beamed. Welcome to the journey of raising children. Alexander rested against the doorframe, observing as Nathan animatedly recounted his day to his mother. Emily glanced at Alexander. You've exceeded my expectations. He let out a soft laugh. We share that sentiment. She paused briefly before stating, I'm glad he has you now. Alexander sensed a constriction in his chest. He confessed that as he departed, a realization struck him. This went beyond Nathan simply getting acquainted with him. He was discovering himself as well. Before we move on to the next segment, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. The following morning, Alexander Carter found himself in his corner office on the 38th floor of Carter Enterprises, gazing out at the sprawling city skyline. The sight of Manhattan was stunning, yet his thoughts drifted elsewhere, to a young boy with a wrapped knee and a beaming grin. In recent days, Nathan had gradually woven himself into the fabric of Alexander's life, yet Alexander remained an outsider in the realm of his own son. He was accustomed to business meetings, contracts, and negotiations, yet now he faced a challenge far more complex, learning how to be a father. A gentle rap on the door pulled him from his thoughts as his assistant, Monica Lewis, entered the room. Excuse me, there's a lady here to speak with you, she claims it's regarding your son. Alexander's heart came to a sudden halt. Emily, please have her come in. Shortly thereafter, a statuesque woman with rich brown eyes and impeccably styled black hair entered the room. She seemed recognizable. Mr. Carter, she said, offering her hand. My name is Sophia Ramirez. I am employed at Nathan's daycare located in Brooklyn Heights. At that moment, clarity washed over him. She was among the educators Emily had referred to. He grasped her hand firmly. What brings you here, Miss Ramirez? She paused momentarily, then retrieved a small notebook from her bag. Nathan has mentioned you quite a bit. Many. Alexander felt a constriction in his chest. Is that a negative thing? Sophia offered a faint smile. Not in the slightest. He's filled with enthusiasm. However, she turned the pages of the notebook and revealed a particular page to him. Nathan's illustrations were straightforward, featuring stick figures. Yet one captured Alexander's attention. A young child grasping the hand of a towering figure. Below, Nathan had inscribed in unsteady handwriting. Alexander sensed a change within himself as he and Daddy shared a moment. Sophia's voice was a gentle whisper. He experiences greater joy in his life. Yet, he is also filled with fear. Alexander glanced upward, taken aback. Fearful. She gave a slight nod. He continually inquires whether you will remain. An unusual discomfort took residence in Alexander's chest. That hadn't crossed his mind. Sophia inclined her body slightly, eager to engage. Mr. Carter, Nathan may be young, yet he possesses a keen intellect. He has spent his entire life under the care of a single mother. Are you going to be there? It holds immense significance for him. However, if you choose to depart. Alexander gulped nervously. He had not fully grasped the potential harm his presence might inflict if he did not tread lightly. Sophia cast him a lingering gaze. Do you intend to remain a part of his life? That evening, Alexander stood outside Emily's apartment in Brooklyn Heights. Emily opened the door, her eyebrow arching in curiosity. You've arrived ahead of schedule. I would like to have a conversation with you. She observed him intently for a brief moment before moving aside. Nathan sprawled on the floor, engrossed in a world of toy cars. Upon catching sight of Alexander, his expression brightened instantly. Father? With a warm smile, Alexander knelt down. Hello, my friend. Nathan eagerly began recounting the events of his day at daycare. Alexander absorbed the words, yet his thoughts whirled in a chaotic dance. After a brief pause, Emily gestured for him to come into the kitchen with her. What's going on? She asked, crossing her arms. Alexander let out a breath. Today, I had the opportunity to meet his teacher. Emily's demeanor became gentler. Sophia? He gave a slight nod. She mentioned that Nathan is concerned I might walk away. Emily's eyes drifted toward the living room, where Nathan continued his play. Alexander confessed that he hadn't anticipated the significance this would hold for him. I wish to avoid causing him any pain. Emily let out a deep breath. I kept him away from you for that reason for quite some time. I had my doubts about your commitment to staying. Alexander experienced a sharp pang of remorse. For years, he had sidestepped responsibility, but with Nathan now in his life, the thought of turning his back was unimaginable. I want to be here, he declared with conviction. Absolutely. Emily observed him intently for a prolonged moment before giving a nod of understanding. Then demonstrate it. That evening, Alexander found himself on the couch alongside Nathan, engrossed in a delightful children's program. Nathan rested against him, exuding a sense of complete comfort. Alexander gazed down at the boy, his son, and silently pledged his commitment. I will not disappoint him. For the very first time, Alexander Carter sensed that he possessed something truly valuable to defend. Before we move on to the next segment, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Alexander Carter had dedicated his life to orchestrating billion-dollar deals, yet as he sat opposite his son in a quaint Brooklyn Heights cafe, he understood that this was the most significant negotiation he would ever face. Nathan perched on a tall stool, his little legs swinging back and forth, while his curly brown hair danced as he savored a bite of his chocolate chip pancake. His eyes glimmered with excitement as he gazed up at Alexander. Hey Dad, do you enjoy pancakes? Nathan inquired, his mouth brimming with food. Alexander let out a soft laugh. I appreciate that, but I feel like my work doesn't quite measure up to yours. Nathan beamed with pride, a dollop of syrup adorning his chin. Emily, seated opposite them, shook her head. Please make use of a napkin, Nathan. Nathan dutifully wiped his face, then faced Alexander once more. What exactly are the roles of fathers? Alexander paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. The inquiry struck him with more force than he had anticipated. He spoke slowly, daddies take care of their kids, they play with them, and then he looked at Emily for assistance. She wore a sly grin. And they impart knowledge to them. Similar to learning to ride a bicycle or fastening their shoelaces. Nathan's expression brightened. Could you show me how to ride a bicycle? Alexander experienced an unusual warmth blossoming in his chest. He had never envisioned himself engaging in something so straightforward, yet significant, as this. Certainly, he replied. When would you like to begin? Nathan chuckled softly. At this moment. Emily arched an eyebrow. At the very least, allow him to complete his pancakes first. Following breakfast, they strolled to a nearby park in Brooklyn Heights, where Emily had left Nathan's small blue bicycle. Alexander found himself in uncharted territory, having never guided anyone through the process of learning to ride a bike. Yet, vivid memories of his own father, Richard Carter, teaching him in the sprawling expanse of Central Park flooded back to him from decades past. "All right, my friend," Alexander said as he knelt beside Nathan. "The initial principle of cycling is..." Nathan leaned in with anticipation. "Stay steady." Alexander let out a soft laugh. "Kind of. However, the true principle is to perpetually advance." Emily observed in silence as Alexander took his place behind the bike, his hands firmly grasping the seat. "All right, Nathan," he replied. "I'll support you for the moment, but you must continue to push forward." Nathan nodded, resolve etched on his youthful features. "Are you prepared?" "Prepared." With a gentle nudge, Alexander encouraged the bike forward, keeping pace with Nathan as he pedaled along. For a brief period, all seemed perfect, until Nathan unexpectedly lost his balance. "Father!" he exclaimed, clutching the handlebars with determination. Alexander intercepted him just in time, stabilizing the bike with a firm grip. "You're fine," he reassured. "Let's give it another shot." Emily smiled gently as she observed them. Witnessing Alexander's genuine dedication held greater significance for her than any lavish display of riches could ever achieve. For the next 30 minutes, Alexander offered his guidance to Nathan with unwavering patience. Whenever Nathan stumbled, Alexander was always there to steady him. And then, an enchanting moment unfolded. Nathan embarked on his journey of riding solo. "Look, Mom! Look, Daddy!" he shouted, laughter bubbling up as he surged ahead on his bike. Alexander remained still for a moment, observing the scene as it played out before him. In that moment, he experienced the profound essence of fatherhood. Later that evening, in his luxurious penthouse in Manhattan, Alexander found himself in his study, gazing intently at a photograph resting on his desk. It was a vintage photograph of his father, Richard Carter. The man was a merciless tycoon, among the wealthiest in New York, but also one of the most distant fathers. In his formative years, Alexander found himself under the care of nannies and tutors, as his father was preoccupied with managing his vast fortune. Richard's interest in Alexander seemed to spark only when he reached the age of 18, a pivotal moment when he was anticipated to step into the role of leading the family business. Alexander had despised it, equals. He vowed to himself that he would never follow in his father's footsteps. Yet somehow he had nearly repeated the same errors. Until Nathan entered the scene. Alexander let out a weary sigh, his fingers pressing against his temples. He had to stand out. He had to improve. At that moment, his phone broke. It was Emily. "Hey," he replied. "Hey," Emily's voice floated in, gentler than normal. "I wanted to take a moment to express my gratitude." Alexander arched an eyebrow. "What for?" "As she mentioned, for today. For your support of Nathan." Alexander reclined in his chair. "I ought to have arrived earlier." A moment of silence lingered. "You're present at this moment," Emily remarked. "And that is what truly counts." Alexander gazed at the shimmering city lights. He never imagined those words would escape her lips. Before he could reply, Emily pressed on, her tone taking on a more earnest quality. "I have one more thing to share with you." Alexander rose to a sitting position. "What is it exactly?" Emily paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. "The matter concerns Nathan's surname." Alexander felt his heart race. "What's the deal with it?" Emily inhaled deeply. "Nathan's surname is Carter." Alexander's breath hitched. He had never been aware. "You shared my last name with him?" Emily's voice floated softly, almost inaudibly. "Absolutely. I always held on to the hope that you would return." Alexander shut his eyes, experiencing a blend of remorse and surprising comfort. Nathan Carter. He echoed the name in his mind, coming to the realization that, for the first time, it resonated perfectly. That night, Alexander resolved to confront his hesitation. He opened his desk drawer and retrieved a document he had been sidestepping for weeks. His final wishes and declarations. Up to this point, all aspects of his estate were designated for his business associates and charitable organizations. Yet, he found himself with another person occupying his thoughts. With a swift motion, Alexander took a pen and struck through a name, replacing it with another. Nathan Carter, the only recipient of the benefits. Once the ink had settled, he let out a breath. Nathan would always feel secure, never facing the fear of abandonment or neglect that Alexander had endured. This time, Alexander was firmly rooted in place. Nathan Carter. That boy of his. The thoughts continued to ripple through him, leaving a lingering sense of disbelief. For 7 long years, he remained unaware of the existence of his child. And the truth continued to sear in his thoughts. What was it that made Emily choose to hide it from him? Driven by a need for clarity, Alexander sent a message to Emily. "Let's rendezvous at the plaza. 10 o'clock in the morning. It's time for a conversation." The reply arrived in just a few minutes. Understood. At precisely 10 a.m., Alexander found himself in a secluded nook of the Palm Court at the Plaza Hotel, poised in anticipation. Emily showed up 5 minutes later, wearing a straightforward blue blouse paired with black jeans. She appeared wary, as though bracing herself for an impending confrontation. She positioned herself opposite him, her hands neatly arranged on the table. "I anticipated you might have some inquiries." Alexander let out a sharp breath. "Do you believe that?" Emily let out a deep breath. "I understand your frustration, but I'm not upset, Emily," Alexander interjected, his tone steady. "I'm absolutely livid. You denied me the chance to see my son for 7 long years. 7. What is the reason?" Emily bit her lip, her gaze drifting elsewhere. "Due to my lack of trust in you." Alexander experienced a sharp sensation. "So, you had doubts about my trustworthiness?" "I was deeply in love with you, Emily. We envisioned a shared future ahead of us." She locked eyes with him, her expression filled with sorrow. "Were we?" "From my perspective, it seemed you were more devoted to your work than to our relationship. You were completely unaware of my need for you." Alexander tightened his jaw. "That seems unjust. Is it not?" Emily inclined her body slightly, eager to engage. "Upon discovering my pregnancy, I felt an overwhelming urge to share the news with you. Yet, you seem to have faded from my existence. Your father had just passed away, and you stepped into the role at Carter Industries. Suddenly, the focus shifted entirely to the company. I attempted to get in touch, but it seems you were preoccupied." Alexander felt a constriction in his chest. He recalled those days. The tension, the ceaseless gatherings, the burden of demonstrating his value to the Carter legacy. Had he truly been so oblivious? Emily continued, her voice soft, "I didn't want Nathan to grow up feeling like an afterthought. I have made the most challenging decision of my life. I turned and left." Alexander swept his fingers through his hair. "You ought to have mentioned it regardless. Your choice wasn't solely yours to decide." Emily's eyes brimmed with remorse. "Indeed, you are correct. I ought to have." A heavy stillness enveloped them. Heavy with feelings that remained unspoken between them. At last, Emily found her voice. "I have no intention of preventing you from being with Nathan. I was never that. However, I had to be certain that your involvement in his life would not be as a casual presence. It was a matter of complete commitment or none at all." Alexander took a deep breath. With unwavering resolve, he declared, "I want to be a part of his life. Completely." Emily regarded him intently for a prolonged moment before finally nodding. "Understood." Later that afternoon, Emily reached out to him with an unexpected invitation that took him by surprise. "My parents would like to meet you," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. For all these years, they have been the sole father figure in Nathan's life. It's essential for them to understand the kind of person you've become. Alexander consented readily. At 6 in the evening. He stood before a humble brownstone in Park Slope, Brooklyn. It stood in stark contrast to the opulent penthouses and towering corporate structures he was accustomed to. Emily's mother, Linda Walker, opened the door, her face a mask of mystery. "Alexander," she said with an air of detachment, "step inside." The interior of the house exuded a cozy, inviting atmosphere, filled with a sense of history and comfort. Framed family photos adorned the walls, with numerous images showcasing Nathan. Emily's father, George Walker, stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed. He was a former educator, a person of conviction and subtle resilience. After a prolonged pause, George finally broke the silence, saying, "So, you've decided to make an appearance." Alexander locked eyes with him, sensing the bitterness in his tone. "I understand that the past is unchangeable, Mr. Walker, yet I am determined to set things right in the present." George observed him intently for a moment before giving a nod of understanding. "Then demonstrate it." Nathan, having been engaged in play in the adjacent room, dashed in with excitement. "Father," he exclaimed with enthusiasm. As Alexander knelt to embrace his son, a wave of emotion surged within him. The embrace conveyed emotions that language could never capture. As Alexander departed from the Walkers' residence that evening, his phone vibrated. A message arrived from his private investigator, Daniel Reed. "I've discovered something, boss. This is something you must witness. Immediate attention required." Alexander felt a knot form in his stomach. He made his way directly to his office at Carter Industries, where Daniel awaited him, a folder clutched in his hand. Daniel pushed it gently across the desk. "The matter concerns Nathan's birth certificate." Alexander scowled as he opened it. Then his breath hitched. "Father's name is not known. His name did not appear on the birth certificate. What on earth is this?" Alexander inquired, his tone cutting through the air. Daniel wore a somber expression. "There's more to it. Emily had Nathan's last name legally changed to Carter a few years back, yet she never included your name on any legal documents." Alexander felt a surge of anger. "What is the reason?" Daniel paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. "I'm uncertain, yet there's an additional point to consider. A man by the name of Brian Harding completed Nathan's school admission forms, taking on the role of his legal guardian." Alexander experienced a sudden emptiness, as if the very breath had been forcefully taken from him. "Who on earth is Brian Harding?" Daniel appeared uneasy. "Emily's former partner." A surge of fury and treachery washed over Alexander. He believed Emily was sincere with him. Yet at this moment, he found himself uncertain about what to trust. Before we move on to the next segment, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Alexander Carter occupied his office at Carter Industries, his gaze fixed on the birth certificate laid out before him. His hands tightened into fists as he reread the words. "Father's name is not known. His name did not appear on the birth certificate of his son." To make matters even more troubling, Brian Harding, who was once in a relationship with Emily, had taken it upon himself to sign Nathan's school documents, claiming the role of his legal guardian. Alexander had devoted the last week to embracing Emily's narrative, striving to forge a bond with his son, and even extending his efforts to connect with Emily's family. Yet, uncertainty seeped in like a smoldering ember. Had Emily deceived him from the very beginning? Had Nathan ever really belonged to him? The sudden buzz of his phone jolted him from his reverie. It was Daniel Reed, the man who delves into the shadows as a private investigator. "I've gathered some information on Brian Harding. This is something you won't want to miss." Alexander inhaled deeply. "Share your thoughts with me." "Brian and Emily had a tumultuous relationship after she parted ways with you. However, let me point this out. Brian's past is marked by fraudulent activities. Years ago, he found himself embroiled in a scandal, fabricating documents to assert legal claims over a child who was not his own. Alexander felt his heart race. Do you believe he treated Nathan in the same way? Daniel paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. While I can't provide evidence at this moment, it's certainly a possibility. A perilous idea took root in Alexander's mind. What if Brian had skillfully maneuvered his way into Nathan's life? What if Emily had been shielding him? An hour later, Alexander burst into Emily's apartment in Park Slope, Brooklyn. Emily's eyes widened in surprise as she swung the door open. Is that you, Alexander? Excuse me. He raised the birth certificate high. Why is my name not included here, Emily? Her complexion drained of color. I am able to provide an explanation. Alexander entered, his tone cutting through the air. You mentioned that you departed because I was preoccupied with other things. However, you didn't bring up Brian Harding. Was he present when you walked away from me? Emily inhaled deeply. Negative. A year later, I encountered Brian. So, what was the reason behind him signing Nathan's school forms as his legal guardian? Emotion flooded Emily's eyes. Due to my fear. Alexander tightened his jaw. What is there to be afraid of? She paused, her voice barely a whisper, you. His heart constricted. Who, me? Emily gave a slight nod. Once I departed, I realized you would feel upset if I revealed the reality. When Nathan came into the world, I feared you might attempt to take him from me. All the power was yours, Alexander. You could have snatched him away from me in an instant. Alexander let out a sharp breath, his fury clashing with the ache in his chest. I would never have taken Nathan away from you. Emily brushed away her tears. Brian was an error. He extended his assistance when Nathan began school, and I accepted it. I aimed to safeguard my son. Alexander raked his fingers through his hair, thoughts swirling in a chaotic dance. So, you crafted my identity from his existence? She gave a slight shake of her head. No. I intended to share that with you, but you didn't allow me to. His voice carried a serene quality, yet the underlying disappointment caused Emily to recoil. They locked eyes for what felt like an eternity. At last, Emily inquired, what would you like to do? Alexander cast his gaze toward Nathan's bedroom door. After the loss of his son, he sought solace in Emily once more. A genetic analysis. At this moment. Emily paused, her breath caught in her throat, but after a heartbeat, she gave a slight nod. 2 days later, Alexander found himself in a private clinic, his gaze fixed on the results clutched in his hands. Rhythm. Almost a perfect match. Nathan was his offspring. A wave of relief washed over him, yet it was tinged with frustration. For 7 long years, he remained oblivious to the existence of his own child. He had overlooked his initial words, his inaugural steps, his first day in the classroom. And it was all due to Emily's fear that, just as he exited the clinic, his phone would ring. It was Emily. Did you receive the results? She inquired softly. Indeed, he mentioned that his voice was in command. He belongs to me. Emily let out a deep breath. I apologize, Alexander. He shut his eyes and inhaled deeply. I seek complete custody. Quietude. So, what comes next? You denied me the chance to see my son for 7 long years, Emily. My trust in you has faded. I am pursuing legal action. Emotion trembled in Emily's voice. Please, Alexander. Please refrain from this action. Yet Alexander had resolved his thoughts. He refused to be a father only on the sidelines. He was determined to be Nathan's father, fully and completely. Completely. Before we move on to the next segment, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. The skyline of New York City unfolded beyond the glass windows of Carter Industries headquarters, where Alexander Carter was seated at his grand mahogany desk. His hands lingered on an envelope he had been evading all day. The document held the findings of the DNA analysis. For weeks, he had been wrestling with the unexpected return of Emily Bennett, the woman he once cherished who had disappeared from his life 7 years prior, now reappearing with a child asserting that he was the father. Nathan. The boy possessed his eyes, his mannerisms, and an undeniable passion for numbers. However, after experiencing betrayal, Alexander required undeniable evidence. With a steadying inhale, he tore into the envelope with urgency. His gaze swept over the document. There is a 99.9% chance of paternity. His heart raced with intensity. It truly happened. Nathan was his child. A whirlwind of feelings churned within him. Frustration for the time lost, gratitude for the clarity of the truth, and a profound, all-encompassing weight of duty. He dedicated years to the creation of an empire. Now he needed to create something much more significant, a bond with his son. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Alexander arrived at Emily's Brooklyn apartment, the city lights beginning to twinkle around him. It wasn't extravagant, but it exuded a sense of comfort and warmth, reminiscent of the nurturing environment a devoted mother would craft for her little one. As Emily swung the door open, her expression was one of unease. "Have you received the results?" she inquired softly. Alexander nodded as he stepped inside. Nathan sat in the living room, engrossed in cartoons, oblivious to the pivotal conversation unfolding just a few feet away. "I understand the truth now," Alexander stated, his tone steady yet resolute. "Nathan is my child." Emily took a deep breath. "I have always been truthful about that." Alexander let out a quick breath. "However, you were not truthful about your reasons for leaving." Emotion flooded Emily's eyes. "I felt a wave of fear, Alexander. Your dedication to your profession was unwavering. I believed I would merely serve as a diversion. And when I discovered I was expecting, I persuaded myself that departing was the most beneficial choice for everyone involved." Alexander's hands tightened into fists. "Countless years gone by. You took away my opportunity to become a father." Emily brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I understand. Every single day, I find myself filled with regret." For the first time, Alexander noticed the guilt reflected in her eyes. The anguish. The offering she had given up. A profound stillness enveloped the space that separated them. At last, Alexander let out a deep sigh. "Nathan should have the opportunity to understand who I am. To possess both of us." Emily's lips trembled. "What do you mean?" "I'm expressing my desire to be a part of his life. Completely. More than a mere weekend guest." Her shoulders eased a bit. "I desire that as well." Weeks stretched into an endless expanse of time. Alexander gradually integrated into Nathan's life. Collecting him from school, assisting with his homework, and taking him to Yankee games. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the park, Nathan turned his gaze upward, meeting his eyes. "Father." Alexander felt a sudden jolt in his chest. It marked the first occasion Nathan had referred to him in that manner. "Absolutely, my friend." Nathan nervously toyed with his shoelaces. "Are you upset with Mom?" With a heavy sigh, Alexander exhaled. "I was indeed. Yet, there are moments when grown-ups err. What truly counts is that we address them." Nathan gave a slight nod. "It's wonderful to have you here at this moment." Alexander gulped, feeling the tightness in his throat. "Same here." One afternoon, while Emily and Nathan were at Alexander's penthouse in Manhattan, he came to a decision. After dinner, he discreetly led Emily away from the group. "I would like for both of you to come and live here." Emily's eyes grew large with surprise. Excuse me. 7 years slipped away with my son. I refuse to waste any more time. This goes beyond Nathan. It revolves around our connection. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Alexander. He confessed, I still love you. I never ceased. Her eyes brimmed with tears. I feel the same way. Alexander gently cradled her face, wiping away her tears, and softly murmured, then let's not waste any more time. As the night enveloped the house, Nathan drifted into slumber in his new room, while Alexander cradled Emily, a profound sense of completeness washing over him as he realized their family was at last united.